Welcome to Medically Speaking. I'm your host, Dr. Eve Glazier. Today we're doing something different, and joining me to kick off a two-part series is Julie Saliba Clauer, a woman unilaterally described by everyone lucky enough to know her as extraordinary. She's an accomplished marketing executive, a devoted mom, and full disclosure, we have been best friends since we were 12. Julie's been living with stage 4 colon cancer for 7 years now, and today she has generously agreed to join me today and share her story in candid detail to help us better understand this disease, its far-reaching impact on every aspect of her life and the lives of those around her. This is episode 1, A Life Interrupted, Early Onset Colon Cancer, Julie's story. Jules, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
I mean, let's just start off with us. Do you remember when we first met?
Oh yes, indeed. with our frizzed out hair before good hair products.
For yourself. Everyone knows I had the most frizzy hair. What do you remember?
I remember being on the little bus that went to the valley because we went to school in the city, and I was so excited to go home and say, I met a friend, Mom, and she lives nearby. And so that's how it started.
It did start that way. I do remember the valley. We were on the Valley bus, the San Fernando Valley bus. But what I also remember is being in our 7th grade dance elective, and you were one of the people who came to 7th grade with like lots of other friends, and I didn't know anybody. And I was sitting alone in like my leotard during like 7th grade dance, and you came up to me and introduced yourself. And I always remember that because you were my first friend.
Well, that's because I knew you were going to be the best dancer in the class, which is true.
That is true. But, you know, we can talk forever about, obviously, you know, for everyone, I grew up in your house. Your dad taught me to water ski. That's generous. I mean, I went water skiing once, and your dad drove the boat, but he was so patient.
My parents call you their favorite daughter.
Yeah. I lived with you guys after college. Your mom's like my other best friend. We played Ouija board a lot in your bathroom.
Yes.
But
not with my mom. That was when we were in junior high.
No, that was, yeah. Well, you don't know what your mom and I do now. But I did want to talk more about today, anyways, just about your cancer story, you know, which is also just your personal story, and early onset colon cancer. Mm-hmm. So I thought maybe we could start, and just for context for everyone, to take us back to March 2018. Could you tell us a little bit about where you were in life and work at that time?
Yeah, so I just had a baby, my first baby, that I was, you know, so excited to be a new mom. She was 7 months old. I was doing marketing consulting at the time. I just kind of had finished up a contract for the week, you know, and there was a day where I was having some rectal bleeding, and the first thing I did was call you to say, what do I do? I was at dinner with a friend, and I'm outside the restaurant. I remember it so clearly, talking to you, saying, what do I do? This was actually on a Thursday, and you said you need to go in and, you know, see a primary care doctor because you were in Los Angeles. I was in Chicago at the time. And so I didn't have a primary care doctor at the time because I had moved to Chicago, and then I had my OB, and she was really my doctor that I went to for everything. So I thought. So I found a doctor, made an appointment, went in on Friday, and he, you know, said, you're a little anemic, you know, you've had this bleeding, so I want you to do a colonoscopy. But don't worry, it's not cancer or anything. I think you might have like IBS or something like that. And so I went down the path of searching who should do a colonoscopy because I'm a complete researcher and nut. And I'm like, well, I want to make sure I have the best person for me to do a colonoscopy. And it was about a 5-week wait to get a colonoscopy. And then that weekend, so this was on a Friday, I finished up the consulting project I was doing. And then that weekend, I started having horrible cramping. And of course, I was like speed dial with you the whole time. And then went to the ER on Monday morning and was in the ER, you know, wondering what it was. It really felt like I was having contractions, like baby contractions. It was that kind of pain. And they did a CAT scan, and about a couple hours later, so I'm in the ER, and a couple hours later they said, the doctor came in, he was very kind, but I had no idea who he was, and he said, you have colon cancer and you have lesions in your liver. And I was like, first of all, of course, like so confused, so no idea what he was talking about. I had no history, nothing that, you know, no family history, nothing that would point to that. I was a relatively healthy person, you know, just having had a baby. And I I don't even know exactly when and how I told people because it was such a blur. I do know that I Googled, even though I knew not to Google. I did Google, where is my liver? Because I had no idea. When they said I had lesions on my liver, I was like, I don't even know where that is. Because as you did it with me, summer school biology, because I was so not a biology person. That was all I did in high school. And so then they said, you need to have surgery and you're not leaving the hospital before you do. And then it became this kind of tumult of oh my God, what am I going to do? And I was panicked about my daughter because she was with the nanny. We had a nanny share. She was the nanny. And I was like, my husband and I are both here. Like, who's going to take my daughter, after the nanny's done? So, luckily I had friends. I had a friend come to be with her, but that was my diagnosis.
Yeah, that's like it's a big old nutshell. Yeah. If it's okay, because I just want to talk a little bit about the symptoms you were having, and if we go back, because I want to tell you a little bit about what I remember, because I think it's important to kind of the symptoms and paying attention to symptoms. Because when you first called me, you said, "Yeah, I'm having some, rectal bleeding." So I would first just say, when you told me that, because I do remember where I was in a parking structure. I asked you kind of what we call are the red flag questions. I was like, what does that mean? Like, is there blood like coated on the top of your stool? Is it mixed in? And I know this is like one of our sort of ongoing pet peeve conversations about blood in the stool, because lots of times when you read about colon cancer or colorectal cancer, it will say, one of the big alarm symptoms or red flag symptoms is blood in the stool. And so I remember asking you that. Do you remember me asking you that?
Yes, totally. I do.
You're like, why is she talking to me?
We're going through a lot of detail about
such detail,
poo.
But it was important. And I just wanted to say, too, is because what you told me, and I think this is important because I think a lot of people, women especially, do, is we also were talking ourselves out, both of us. Kind of, I was like, well, what else is going on? And you're like, well, I'm also postpartum. I just had a baby. I had hemorrhoids, while I was pregnant. So that was the first one. We were like, oh, okay, well, maybe there's just a hemorrhoid bleeding. We were talking this out. And then I said to you, are you losing weight? And you said, I am, but I also just had a baby and I'm breastfeeding. Right. So those were like kind of the two big questions. Do you remember that?
Totally. Absolutely. Absolutely. And when I was in the doctor, they repeated the same questions, which because
I'm very
you're very, very good at your job. And so they're asking me questions, and they're asking me like, have you been unusually tired lately? And I said, yes. And they said, since when? I was like, since I had a baby.
Right.
And then they asked me if I'd lost weight. And I thought I was one of those people that breastfed and lost weight, just came off. And, so all the things that I was experiencing, the bleeding, which I thought was from the hemorrhoids and all of that, I thought was related to...
Of course.
And it could have been still. I don't even know, actually, what were symptoms of colon cancer and what were symptoms of being a new mom.
How old were you at this time?
I was 43
right,
at the time.
Exactly. So who's going to instantly go to, you have colon cancer? Again, we're trained as physicians to be like, there's a whole spectrum of kind of diagnoses, but... we have this phrase in medicine, when you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras, right?
Right.
For a reason. So you're like, well, what's most common? But I remember us talking about that and being like, how do we discern and differentiate?
Right.
Just in this introductory part of like us talking about these symptoms.
Right. Well, interestingly, the symptom that I got that weekend, which was the extreme cramping, turned out it was from something called an intussusception, which probably was related to the cancer, but it wasn't actually directly from my tumor, or it's not a typical cancer symptom. So that kind of threw things the other way too, because I remember talking to you and you saying, okay, you need to go into the ER.
Because it escalated way too quickly.
Yeah.
But yes, so you're like navigating new motherhood, you're breastfeeding, you're losing weight. I guess I want to ask you though, when you did see blood in your stool, clearly it triggered something in you, right? That you called me.
Yes. Yeah. Because it changed. The blood changed. You know, it wasn't the same as when I had hemorrhoids. It was a lot more of it. It was darker. It just wasn't the same as what I'd experienced. So even though we both kind of like, well, could it be that? But I also, it was more than what I had been used to.
And this is, a point I want to make for our listeners too, which is to say, even if you see dark red stool, right, and when you go to the restroom next or have a bowel movement, what I want to point out to everyone is that any new symptom, and especially if it changes, just let us know and come on in.
Yeah.
Right? I love telling people they have hemorrhoids. Yeah. Right?
Yeah,
I do.
Totally. Yeah.
It's a hemorrhoid, which is just a swollen vein, right, in your rectum or an anus. But it does... it does sound like you felt a change, right? And it was a little bit alarming.
And the other thing, too, that they say is if you find an unusual stool.
Yeah.
And I honestly, 7 years later, I don't know what an unusual stool is.
Right.
Because you don't talk to that. You know, when you're learning how to go to the bathroom and stuff, you don't necessarily describe what your regular stool is like, because it's just what you've had and what you're used to. So, you know, understanding what is a regular stool, I think is really important, too.
It is, and what your own normal is, like the range of your normal, so you know if something is different.
Right.
You can tell that Julie and I talk about stool a lot.
Yes. You should see our text chains. It's like, how the kids? Okay, here's a picture of poop. And, you know,
sometimes
do you want to go
photos.
out next week? Yeah.
And I'm honored by them. So do you remember, we'll get to the emergency room, but I want to go to one of the points that you made, that you didn't have a primary care doctor, which, as you know, since you're a fan of the pod, that, and actually remember, Katie Kirk was on here too, and she commented, she actually reflected, and I felt badly about this, that she felt bad because she hadn't made her husband had a primary care doc. And first of all, I was like, why do you feel responsible for that? But I think all of us, right, need to keep on encouraging people to have that primary care doctor in their pocket. And I know you were just mentioning to me what you like about primary care docs, but you know, I wanted you, lots of times we do want to start with that primary care doctor, right? I mean, my goodness, if it wasn't colon cancer, start with the generalist to evaluate this new symptom.
Right. And, you know, thinking about the OB, I think a lot of people in their, you know, childbearing years, their OB, you know, they do their wellness exam.
Absolutely.
They're like, what else do I really need? I have that. But the reality is, I mean, I just didn't really get sick at all. So I didn't really have a reason to have another doctor. But the reality is you do need another doctor, because if things like this come up, it's really important. And I also think, like, in their specialty, you know, my OB was amazing. She's actually was married to a GI doc.
Right.
So her husband is a GI doc. So, you know, not that necessarily you naturally learn the other discipline because you're living with the person.
I also want to point out Julie is an honorary doctor by this point, which is like when she's not going to spell out any of the acronyms. So GI is gastrointestinal. You're like so lingoed out now.
Yeah, I'm very lingoed out. But when you're doing, you know, ultrasound after ultrasound, they're really only looking at the uterus or you know, the parts that matter for them. They're not looking at the whole system. Meanwhile, I had these tumors that, you know, were right next door that that weren't necessarily looked at. Right.
And you said too, you know, you're like, I never get sick, right? You know, all these other reasons to feeling tired, even anemic. You know, have some blood in your stool, but you also said you didn't have a family history. And I just want to bring that up, or maybe you could share like why that's relevant or not relevant to colon cancer diagnosis. Because
I think there you know, there's known what are they called?
Risk factors.
Risk factors, thank you. You know, being, you know, overweight or obese, having a family history, you know, those kinds of things. And at the time, I think had I had somebody in my family that had it, I would have been clued into it. But I also think that when I went to the doctor, you know, it just never came up as like something that I might have. And especially my age, because people don't think of people that are younger having colon cancer. So like you said, you kind of look for the horse, not the zebra. Unfortunately, the zebras are coming in herds now because the incidence is so high. So making sure that all of those primary care doctors, so kind of traditional primary care doctors, but OBs, ER medicine, because a lot of people are using ER medicine for things, you know, that they know the new risk factors, if you will, or the unsure risk factors that could lead to a cancer diagnosis, both colon cancer and, you know, other cancers as well.
And you mentioned, and we'll put, you know, these links in the show notes, and we'll have, you know, experts on in the future, although you're obviously an expert, Julie. But it is true. I mean, what we're seeing now is that early onset gastrointestinal cancers are rising globally, with colorectal cancer leading that trend. And the largest increases that we're seeing are in patients 30 to 50. I really want to say that when you were diagnosed, like, I didn't know that then, you know? So, I mean, that's been something in the last 5 years that's, you know, definitely been, you know, noted, remarked upon, being increasingly studied. People are figuring out the reason why. But, I mean, it was very unusual to me, too, even though I was, you know, very worried when you called me. It wasn't where I went first necessarily.
Right. And I think that a little bit of a challenge, it's good that the guidelines for colonoscopy have gone from 50 to 45, which is fantastic. But I think that makes it seem like 45 is kind of the age you should start to worry.
That's
and the
right.
reality is, I wasn't 45 yet.
No.
And I know a lot of people that have been diagnosed that weren't at that age yet
Right.
either. I mean, even teenagers are getting diagnosed with colon cancer.
And I do want to say, even though, of course, I will always put in a plug for having a primary care doctor, there was nothing, obviously, that you could have done or done differently, in terms of your diagnosis. It's just to say that there's, and we'll talk about having a care team. It's just to say that there's, that was part of your journey, was even just finding the primary care doc. I know exactly where I was when you went to the emergency room, and I was so worried because you were in so much pain. So it's like, on top of just getting a diagnosis, you're also just in so much pain. But I do remember you calling me, and you just shared with us, the doctor saying that you called me. I was in my office at work, and you said it doesn't look good. That's how you told me. And then your mom called me. I don't know if you knew that.
I'm not surprised. I didn't know that, but I'm not surprised.
Your mom called me, and she just said, I can't breathe. And honestly, I've never felt more helpless in my life. But I think, right, your mind, as you said, went instantly to, oh my God, the logistics of like your sweet new baby, Liana.
Yeah.
And of course, because you're so amazing, you have an amazing circle of, friends who also, I remember, also had small children at the time.
Right.
Right?
Yes. Yeah. So I called, I was at the hospital. I called my friend that lived in Chicago and, had kids. And I called her and said, I have cancer. I'm not getting out of the hospital. Can you go get Liana? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so she's like, sure. And it's amazing to have a friend who just, can drop everything, and her husband, amazing, can take care of her kids so she can come take care of mine. And at the time I remember thinking, like, this is one of my closest friends.
Michelle.
This is Michelle. But Liana doesn't know her. So my baby that's been only with people, and I'm worried, saying, my poor baby's going to have this random stranger, And then we had gotten nanny cam for the nanny share. So I was in the hospital watching Liana on the nanny cam. And my friend's there, and she's singing her Christmas song. And I'm a mess because I'm sitting there thinking, I'm not going to see her first birthday. Like, this is, I was scared. And my friend started singing Christmas carols to her. And I was like, what? And through the voice of the camera, she didn't even know there was a camera. I was like, what are you doing? She's like, I can't think of any baby songs. And it shows you. And her kids are not that much older. And you go, it shows you like so many things of parenthood and everything. Just, you're so in it at the moment. And then you just kind of move past it, and it's kind of similar to cancer in some ways too.
I know you were remarking about one of our episodes that we just did, released matrescence,
right?
And you were saying that there's a corollary.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think there's a term, cancerescence, where you literally, after that diagnosis, every single person that's been diagnosed with cancer can tell you probably to the minute what their diagnosis was. The day, the hour,
that they found out.
That they found out those words. You have cancer, because it is a life-changing moment. And there's a quote that says, like, you have all of these problems until you have a health problem, and then that's the only problem that matters.
Yeah. And
that day, your entire world shifts. And kind of like motherhood, when she was describing matrescence, it affects everything. It doesn't just affect you physically. It affects your relationships. It affects how you come into the world, what you're able to handle, everything. There's a lot of grief because you're grieving things that you...
Like instantly? Or just over time?
Well, I think at first it's anticipatory grief.
Right.
Because like I said, I didn't think I was going to make it to my daughter's first birthday.
So that's where your mind went instantly?
Instantly. So my mind, and then I would just cry. Like, I would just see her and cry. And,
Yes.
But then pretty soon after I was in the hospital, they said I was going to have surgery. I was going to have to stop breastfeeding. And that was a painful thing for me because, as a mom, like that was part of our, and that was part of our experience. And to have to do it abruptly, that I think is the first thing that I grieved from, kind of truly like grieving a loss that came from the disease. And, and then it kind of progressed from there that it's a strange, it's that, what do they call it? They call it ambiguous grief, and it's you didn't lose a person that's physical. That there's a very clear message
physical
there.
Loss, yes.
But there's a lot of grief that comes with the diagnosis.
So, I mean, even when you're sitting there and they say stage 4, now you're an expert, and it's very confusing even and again, I'm a primary care physician, not an oncologist, but just even the stages alone. I mean, there's stage 1, 2, 3, 4, and then there's 2B, 3A. So, and we don't need to go into those. We'll put some links in, but they just came to you and said stage 4. What did you understand that to mean? I mean, how would you explain that?
I don't even know in the hospital if they told me stage 4. They just said you have lesions on your liver, it's spread, your liver is covered.
Right.
It's not good. So that's what I told you.
Yes.
The medical term I heard was it's not good.
That's what I
told you.
Yes.
So I ended up having surgery a couple days later, and then I proceeded to go to multiple oncologists in Chicago and Los Angeles because I wasn't sure. I knew this was going to be a long haul, and I didn't have family, even though I had a wonderful group of friends in Chicago, and my family was here. So I went to oncologist in Chicago, oncologist in LA. I figured when I'm interviewing somebody for a job, I interview at least a few people, and this is going to be a long-term relationship, so I'm not just going to go with whoever they tell me.
But it's amazing you had that presence of mind, truly.
Yeah, well, I also had 5 or 6 weeks that I had to recover from surgery, and I couldn't do anything. So I think kind of my, just anxiety,
into your skill set.
My coping was like do whatever you can, and that was an amazing experience. And I know that it's not accessible for everybody to go see multiple doctors like that, but I learned they all were fantastic. I learned something from each of them that I honestly still have in my head 7.5 years later.
This was as you were searching.
This was as I'm searching for my oncologist.
So this is the doctor who's your primary cancer doctor.
Yes, my primary cancer doctor, my medical oncologist. I basically went through an interview season while I was waiting to start. And I learned something from each of them. And I think it's because it's such a foreign language. I mean, I didn't really know anybody that had, my grandmother had cancer when I was like a little kid, and I didn't really, I hadn't been close to the cancer experience before. And it is an entirely different world of language. And so I think like you're describing with the stages and everything, you kind of learn little bits and you kind of put together the story as you go. And unfortunately, you're at a place where you're having to make decisions, big decisions, very quickly. Yeah. So I think for me, I feel like, my next step was to go into chemo, and then the plan was to get to surgery for my liver. And those choices when basically it's like, do liver surgery or you die. Those are very easy decisions because it's like, okay, well, I don't want to die, so I'm going to go door A. The problem, I think, is more when there's a lot more ambiguity and nuance and confusion. I mean, now as I've gotten later in my journey, that's happened to me where there's not as clear of answers. And I think earlier stages of cancer can, depending on the cancer and depending on the treatments available, can be harder for that reason because there's a lot more ambiguity and a lot more tougher decisions.
It's not just a recipe.
It's not just 100%, it's not clear like that. So after I was diagnosed, I had a friend who was diagnosed with early stage breast cancer. She called me to help her, talk through her choices, and I was like, this is so hard. I have it easy, because the extremes are a lot easier to deal with, and unfortunately in cancer there's very few extremes. It's very much, and I think any disease, honestly, there's very few diseases where things are super clear, and so kind of living in that gray space is really hard. And I think also understanding that there's an art to medicine. And as a patient, you just are like, oh, well, medicine is a scientific pursuit. It's very, black and white. There's data to support things. But the data is statistics, right? So you say, hey, this treatment is 30% chance of working, and this treatment has 30% chance of working. And my oncologist, I had a point where it was that. And he said, but we don't know what 30% you are. We don't know if you're in either of these 30%. So it's good to know the data, but there's a lot of nuance in knowing your medical care team and knowing yourself and what you're willing to do. One time you and I were talking and I had one of those choices. It was the 30%, and you're like, okay, we'll do a tree, and kind of you brought both like
a whole decision tree.
Your whole decision tree. And so we did a decision tree, and we're like, if this happens, X, this happens. And so it was so helpful because you were bringing it both with you as your logic, and then also as a clinician, we're able to bring that, kind of structure to my thinking process. And I said, but then what if this happens? You're like, that's a whole other trunk. Like that's a whole other path. And so,
but it's so overwhelming.
Overwhelming.
How have you I guess, tried to cope with that overwhelmingness or even just the uncertainty?
I think a lot of it plays to you as a person. So when I was working, one of my awesome bosses, who was a long-term mentor of mine, she said to me one day, she said, "You find comfort in chaos." And I was like, or clarity in chaos. Sorry, you find clarity in chaos. And I was like, that's interesting. And I realized that I'm a very gray area person. I'm not a black and white in general. And so for me, it's easier for me to live in the gray, I think, than
it's more authentic.
Some people. It just works.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I didn't have that naturally, if I would be able to handle it. But you kind of learn as you go. I used to always look at my scan reports immediately. I'd look at them. I'd send them to you. To look at them and to read what they said. And then there was a few things in there that, I don't know, radiology reports, who the person that reads the scans, it's a whole other language in itself. And it's very kind of conservative, I would say, in their language. So everything is, attention on follow-up and things. And you're like, what? That sounds so scary. So there was things in there that I didn't necessarily understand. And you as a medical professional, you're looking at it, you're not an oncologist. That's, I think, the important thing, too, to know that not all doctors have the same knowledge set, right?
You know way more about colon cancer than I ever will.
But you were able to help me kind of think through scenarios and whatnot. But really, until I got to my oncologist, and there was a few times where I really, over the weekend, would be spiraling because I thought I was dying. And I'd come in and he'd be like, "Oh yeah, no, that's nothing." And I'm like, "What?"
Well, so that's the art of interpret. That's the art. It's the interpretation. It's context. It's why AI won't come for our jobs.
Yes,
because it really is, and it's so dynamic.
Right. And so now I don't look at the scans before.
I know you don't.
I wait till I go in to see him because there's no value I'm going to get. And so I think what I've done to kind of cope and handle that, is figuring out what can I control, and that level of stress that I didn't need, I can control that by not looking at the scan reports. And then when I go into my oncologist, we're able to talk about it, and I'm able to get the information I need at the time, so I could get rid of that stress that I didn't need.
It is really overwhelming, though. There's a lot of information. There are choices, and we've talked a little bit about on this pod, especially about shared decision making, right? Which is partnering, right? Doctors, care teams with patients. But sometimes it's really hard. I mean, if you really just don't know anything about, right, the molecular genetics of a cancer tumor, I personally would feel really overwhelmed about making a decision. So on one hand, we don't want to be super paternalistic, right, and just have people be like, you need to do this. And on the other hand, the other extreme of how can I make a decision on my own? It really feels like, and actually I know this to be true, that you've partnered with your docs, one of them being the medical oncologist. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, what that care team is. And when we say care team, right? So there's a medical oncologist, but tell us about your care team and I guess how you talk about all of this with them over time.
Yes. So my medical oncologist is a huge part of my care team, and his nurse practitioner is also a big part of my care team. And the two of them work very closely together, but they play different roles in terms of when I'm having, a side effect or something that I need treated. I usually will talk to her sometimes over him. When I need strategy on my treatment, I talk to him. And not that that's the case with every medical oncologist. It's just I know my team and what they are good at and how they kind of think and approach.
You play to their strengths.
I play to their strengths, and I think so they're core to my cancer care team. But you are core to my team. I call you my PCP BFF, my primary care physician, best friend forever. Or we call you Dr. Petunia in my house because you're Petunia is our nickname for you. So when I'm asking a doctor question, I'll say,
I'm edit that out.
Yes. I need to talk to Dr. Petunia. And it's interesting because I have a lot of friends who have cancer who don't have a primary care doctor anymore because their oncologist has become their primary person because pretty much most things are related. But what I realized is when I had COVID, I called you because that has nothing to do with my cancer necessarily. And you make sure that anything you tell me to do related to that if you think there's going to be an interaction or an issue, to talk to my oncologist. Absolutely. So, understanding what people's scope and lanes are and having them play that role as best as possible. I have 5 different subspecialties of surgeons on my care team. I actually just bumped into one when I was giving my infusion for through my medical oncologist, I bumped into my lung surgeon in the hallway. I'm like, still don't need you again. So I have, but there's specialties of surgeons. So you think like, oh, well, I have a surgeon. But the reality is there's specific surgeons, as my thoracic surgeon said to me, which is the lungs. I was asking him a question. He goes, that's the other side of the diaphragm, because it was something related to my liver. So, I needed to talk to my liver surgeon about it. Again, my biology is not so smart at the time, so I didn't know that. But I think even knowing that just having a surgeon isn't really
right. It's not like an all-encompassing surgeon.
I mean, there are general surgeons, there's surgical oncologists who can do a variety of things, but then there's specialists who really know their specialty really well. But knowing that and knowing what to ask them and kind of what role do they play in your care, and they can go beyond their specialty. You can say, I just want your overall medical opinion about this, and just because of who they are and how they think about medicine and the body and all of that stuff. But just understanding that and knowing that that's a skill that some people have and some people don't necessarily. You don't need them to. I also have radiation oncologists. Now I'm meeting with an interventional radiologist and a pain doctor who we love. And, a lot of pain things my oncologist can help treat, you can help treat, but sometimes there's been things that are just kind of, again, beyond. And so to have a pain specialist who specializes in oncology has been extremely helpful. And she is, my lifeline at those moments that I need her.
I mean, it's a relief to me to be able to defer. I mean, I 100% have the humility to acknowledge what I don't have expertise in. I know this to be true, that everyone in your care team, all of these different providers, nurse practitioners, physicians, therapists, I feel like we're all pretty good about deferring to that expert.
Yes.
But I also want to point out that I can't pretend that hasn't placed a huge burden on you, and you are an incredibly capable person. You're an advocate for others, yourself, but you've really organized, you're really the glue between all these appointments and issues. And yes, I know we have electronic medical records, but I mean, I was wondering if you could share even just some tips, because even when you were choosing your oncologist, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, because I was in some of those meetings where we went and sat in the waiting room, sat in the exam room, right, with your parents.
Yeah.
One of us was appointed to take notes. I hope it wasn't me.
So we have to talk about that, because having somebody go to take notes is very valuable. Or asking the oncologist if you can record it, or whoever the specialist is. But if you have somebody in there taking notes, make sure it's somebody who's mentally in the place to take notes. So I went to, all these oncology appointments
when you were choosing.
When I was choosing. And my husband, my mom, my dad, and then you came to some of them, right? We're at the appointments. All four of you played the role of note keeper, and I can tell you that only one of you, which was you, actually wrote anything down. Afterwards, I said, okay, where are the notes? And there'd be like one word. And
Your dad had like doodles.
Yeah. But it's because they also are processing it.
That's right.
So it's very important, and people will say, like, take somebody with you to take notes. But if you have somebody really close to you, and not that you're not close to me, but you're more, my medically savvy best friend, as Dr. Hahn said on one of your...
Dr. Maria Hahn, our PCP,
yes, she said about PCPs.
Yes.
And that's true. I mean, you happen to also be my best friend, but I think how you treat your patients is the same, where you can be that kind of role. But I think understanding as a patient that the people closest to you are also going through it, and it is very hard for them as well. So it can be helpful to have somebody that maybe is one step removed playing some of these roles for you.
Right, like that objective note taker. I always tell people, also write, we've said this before too in preparing for different appointments, but writing down your questions before, your questions after. I mean, again, the thunderous receiving of getting this diagnosis in the first place. I mean, how are you even possibly supposed to think clearly? And then you go to these appointments where everyone is using words that no one has ever heard of, and it's so complex. They make sense. Our best docs are still, of course. I mean, we're using very nuanced, very scientific language.
Yes.
So yes, having someone to take those notes, organize them for you, summarize them for you.
Yes. And people think, people say all the time, what can I do for you? Whatever. I'll just give an example. I have a friend who lives in New York, Adriana, who's amazing. She researched in the finance field. So she really researches companies, all of that stuff. Nothing to do with science, nothing to do with cancer. She lives in New York, And she plays the role of organizing research on clinical trials for me.
I remember.
So when I'd have a clinical trial that I'd find something on that I was interested in, I'd just forward it to her, tag her on it, and then she could organize it for me. And so it, like, if you think broadly about your support network and people and their skills, there's a lot you can leverage, right? In that, even if you don't have a kind of person with you at every appointment kind of thing. So to be thinking about that in terms of what is it that you need and what is it that you can outsource, if you will.
Right.
That was something that I could do, but outsourcing it to her, gave her a way to help me from afar, because she, as a good friend, wanted to be a help from afar. So giving her something to do, but also let me get one thing off my plate related to cancer. Another thing that somebody suggested, which I do, is Mondays are my infusion day. Now I currently have infusions every 3 weeks. And so I try to make everything I can medically happen on Monday. So dealing with insurance, dealing with bills, going to the dentist, whatever it is, Monday's my day. Part of that is because I don't schedule other things really on Monday, because I know that every 3 weeks I'm not going to be able to, I'm going to have to go to the infusion center and be out. But also it kind of gives one day to cancer, and then the rest of the time is for me. And one day to medicine. Now, granted, it doesn't always work out, because sometimes doctors, clinic schedules and stuff don't match up. But in trying to do that, it helps kind of compartmentalize it as much as I can.
So it's not like taking over your entire identity.
Right. And at times, if there's something major like a surgery that needs to be scheduled and all that stuff, you get off track sometimes. And I describe it kind of like cancer, or, any long-term disease you have, as you're in a car and cancer's in the car with you. The question is, where in the car is the cancer? So is it, in the backseat where it's, it's there, but you don't have to pay attention to it? Is it singing in the backseat like my daughter does sometimes, and there's no point, but you definitely have to pay attention to it? Or is it like in the front seat trying to take the steering wheel?
Right.
Or can you put it in the trunk? Or
Lock it.
some people can kick it out of the car. I haven't had the luck to be able to kick it out the car yet, but it's always in my car. And so just thinking about it as that, you kind of go, okay, it's here, it's going to be here, but let me just be mindful of where it is in the car so that I give it its attention. If it's being quiet in the back seat, I don't have to give it attention. If it's yelling out to me in the back seat, then I need to kind of give some attention, and kind of having that kind of thinking of it as a passenger with you and attending to it, but not over attending to it. Because one of the things one of the first oncologists I met with when I was doing my interview tour, he said, don't become a professional patient. And I took that to heart. Now, granted, I'm doing a lot of volunteer work related to it, so I am kind of but in terms of my own care, he said, you could do everything. You could get, your diet and everything can be wrapped up in this disease. And don't let it, because if there's something that's good and important for you to do, we'll make sure you do it. But the reality is there's no silver bullet, and there's nothing that, there's no like secret out there that's being kept from us in terms of addressing the disease. So you have to lean into the best choices and the best treatments you can, but not make it overcome your whole life.
Do you think you were able to take that to heart and to practice right away, or did it take you some time?
Took me some time. So it definitely took me some time, because we decided when meeting with oncologists, I found my perfect match here in LA. So we moved to LA. So, so it did disrupt my life in a lot more ways than even just the diagnosis, and also getting used to chemo the first time and all of those things. And I think if you have a disease that can be treated like in a short spurt, where you go, okay, you're going to have 3 months of chemo and then you're done, or whatever it is, then I think you can potentially kind of get more consumed by it. But when it's going to be a long haul, that you just can't, it's not sustainable.
I was thinking about, right. I mean, you're evolving, the entire time and growing. Just thinking about those, first weeks after diagnosis, I mean, is there anything there's something that you wish that you would have known at that time, or someone would have done or said differently?
I think a few things that I've learned that I feel like might have been helpful, although if somebody told me at the time, I probably wouldn't have listened to them, is, and everything isn't urgent. And so, you sit there and you're like, this cancer is inside of me. Like, we have to do something right away. And yeah, you can't just let it go for months. And, depending on the aggressive, I had pretty aggressive cancer. So it's not, it's not like I could go months, but a couple weeks here, it's okay. Like, you can take breaks from chemo if you need to, if you have an important vacation or something that you want to do. Like, it's not, everything isn't as urgent. And I think that is a rub when you're first diagnosed. It's really hard because you call like a doctor's office and you make an appointment and they're like, yeah, we'll see you in 3 months. And you're like, no, but I'm dying today.
Of course, that's excruciating.
And
you want to have a plan, right?
You want to have a plan. And so getting to that plan, and once you have the plan, it's a lot easier. But getting to that plan is tough. But I would just say that it may not seem as urgent and concerning to everybody else because like the medical care team has been through this and they know, like, it's okay if you wait 3 weeks for this surgery, but you don't know that. So asking those questions, I think, is really important. Is like,
and I would say to my colleagues, though, I mean, it's explaining that as well, that it's not urgent. I mean, from where you're sitting now and your expertise, you can say that. But when you first get that diagnosis, also, I just want to say too, tell me if you agree with me, is that being told you have stage 4 cancer, it's in your liver. There are so many other steps, even just to subtyping what kind of cancer it is, what its genetics are, what its tumor markers are. All those things take time and then also inform what the treatment plan is going to be.
Yes.
So, I mean, that's what's, I guess, just, I'm asking you, but I mean, it just seems even harder.
Well, it's harder. And also that's something that I wish I would have known earlier, I think, is that cancer is like, it's like everybody's fingerprint. It's different in everybody because every kind of cancer is different. Within colorectal cancer, colon cancer, rectal cancer, totally treated differently, totally different thing. In colon cancer, stage 3 cancer versus stage 4 cancer, different MSS, high. These are all terms that you learn, but they all are different. And then you get down to, and that cancer is in you as an individual, and your biology is like no other. And so all of those things together make it very specific.
Is that comforting or distressing or neither?
I mean, I think it's comforting because then when you look at the statistics, you can say those statistics don't really apply to me. Yeah. So, like when I was first diagnosed, the numbers were really grim in terms of a 5-year survival. But then one of the brilliant doctors oncologists I met right away said, but your statistics are 0 or 100. Like in any treatment, like it's going to work or it isn't on you. So it doesn't matter really. Now all of that is important because you want to go with something that is proven to work with as many people in your general situation as possible. So I get that. But you also have to understand that it's like, it's unique to you. So making sure that you're, for me, it was very important to have an oncologist who used the research, used the science, but applied it to me as an individual very specifically. Right. And that is a very tough thing to do. It's totally an art. And so finding somebody that you trust that can do that for you, because there are those gray areas, and having somebody who can say, well, this doesn't make sense. Like I got a scan one time, and like I said, having my oncologist there to read it is so important. But he got the scan report, and he's going, this is not my patient. Like, so he called the radiologist and said, can you look at it again? Because clinically, like if you knew this patient, you would say this is not what's happening. And they went back and looked at it. So having somebody who really understands you, and that was, something that was really powerful in the episode you had on primary care providers is all of this information has been built up over time about my case, but also about me as a person and how I make decisions. And, you and I have talked about this, like communication styles. All those things are really different. And I think it's hard for patients to think of their medical provider as a human being who also is trying to navigate all that with you. So you think about their schedule, right?
I just want to point out how generous you are, even thinking about physicians and their busy schedules and having to shift gears from patient to patient. So I'd rather just really emphasize what you're saying is, as a patient, you do have agency. That's really important. And I've even talked about with colleagues, like, sometimes we're taken aback, but we do have the humility, I think good doctors do, which is to say, oh my gosh, I am speaking too fast. And you know what? Yes, slow me down. So absolutely, you as a patient have agency, and as much as possible, I mean, again, like, I don't want to put the burden on the patient. You're going through all this, let alone having to tell someone, right, to slow down or spend more time with you. But I just want to also just emphasize the point, and you are very methodical, as we know, in making your choices about your care team. But you can always get second opinions. You can break up with your doctor, choose different ones. I just wanted to make that point if that has come up with you.
Yes, and I think, I do get second opinions, as I learned in the beginning. Is you learn a lot from different perspectives, and because it isn't black and white, there's not a most cases, right? There's very few times when it's like, this is the only path that we could possibly do. That doctors only know what they've treated, what their experience is. So finding somebody with the specialty and experience in what you have, but also understanding, how do they learn about things they don't know about, right? Because I think that's a good question to ask a doctor, an oncologist or any doctor, but I tell new patients, ask them, if there's something, that you've never treated before, how would you find out what to do? And they might say, I talk to colleagues, I research it here, whatever. And all of those are fantastic answers. The answer that's like looking at you blankly, like, what do you mean I wouldn't know something? That's when I think you have a problem, and you say, you know what, is this really the person? Because my oncologist is world renowned and one of the most amazing, specifically colorectal cancer specialists in the world. And he knows he doesn't know everything. He'll say, oh, I'm going to reach out to my, colleague about this. And so I think it's important to know that, that doctors are very knowledgeable. They know a lot of things. You want them to be confident, but you have to know that they don't know everything. And if they don't know that they don't know everything, then it's a good time to see a second opinion.
Right. Well, I mean, I think you're only going to trust a physician, right?
Yeah.
Anyone, a person, right? A friend, if they acknowledge they don't know everything. And that is such a great question to say, what do you do when you don't know anything? It also acknowledges that this is an incredibly evolving, dynamic, nuanced field.
Right.
But really, I mean, I think what you're saying could go for really any chronic condition as well.
Right.
And just, again, your own, agency.
But I think, too, in terms of understanding doctors as humans is, if we're looking for shared decision making, which I think is so important, I think the issue has been, it's always been like paternalistic. And so therefore, like, the doctor knows best, listen to the doctor knows best. And so for doctors to understand, kind of not to operate that way, but also for patients to understand not to operate that way. Treat your doctor with the respect that their experience deserves, for sure. Like, I respect and admire all of my doctors. But I also understand that, like, it's shared. So that means my voice is as important, not only in the decision making, but in the conversation, in the flow. And like, I need you to do this, or for me, is there a way we can do this? Or is there somebody else on your team I could talk to when, and that goes for everything from scheduling. A lot of times there's scheduling issues and the doctor doesn't even know that that's happening because they're not aware of it. So, having those conversations so that they know is, I think, very valuable.
I just wanted to ask you a couple of things, just going back to when you were diagnosed, and sharing the news. I mean, I think, I don't know, we talked about, just being in the emergency room and, not even really remembering, like, calling your parents or, or me. But, you've mentioned your beautiful daughter, Liana. She's how old now?
She's 8.
She's 8, right? So she's so little, but I'm curious, in terms of sharing the news with her, did you, tell her, sit her down and tell her? How has that kind of conversation evolved as she's grown, as you've grown?
I feel, again, very lucky. Being diagnosed with stage 4 is sometimes better than earlier stages. And the same thing, being diagnosed when she was so little, because she had no perception of what cancer was. And at that time, she was 7 months old, right? And even when she was a little kid, she didn't learn from the outside it was something scary. So basically, I could control how she learned about cancer and what that meant. And I think that was a gift in a lot of ways, because I didn't have to worry about, people looking at her going, oh, you have cancer, kind of thing before she kind of learned about it from me. So she knows I have cancer. She, knows when I'm going to the doctor. I try again to do it on Mondays while she's at school. So a lot of times she doesn't realize all the appointments I go to. And actually, it's funny. I introduced her one day to my oncologist after like 6 years. There was an opportunity, and I was like, I'm so excited for you to meet my doctor. And she goes, Dr. Petunia's here? And I was like, no, my other doctor that I see all the time. And she, in her mind, she has one doctor, right? And she doesn't get that I have 12 of them that I see on a regular basis. But it kind of helps to kind of think about it from her perspective, that it's kind of just something mom has, and it's part of my life. When she was younger, you have all these thoughts though, like, will I live long enough for her to remember me? Right. So that was like a, milestone, and like all of these things. And I still think about, like my potential death, because I do, it's a terminal disease, and this likely will be the thing that kills me. The question is when, and I've, had it active disease for 7 years, and you get to a point where that's not survivable at some point. And so I do think about those things, and so planning that with her. And I just had actually a gift, a horrible gift, that a very close loved one passed away young, and it was horrible. But when we went to the hospice house to visit him, and she came with us, and I was like, said to him, you're giving me this gift of being able to be the one that I can understand how she is learning about death, and kind of an unexpected death. And it's not about me. So actually I'm getting this, so taking in different things from life and be able to bringing it into my parenting of her, of being a parent with cancer. There's also amazing organizations that can help with this. So, there's a great organization called Bright Spot Network that focuses on parents who have young kids, basically 8 and under. And so through those support groups where you talk to other parents who are going through the same thing, and understanding what they're doing and how they're doing it is, I think, really, really helpful. Because as she grows, it changes.
Right. She's changing. Right.
Changing. Well, and I remember one time when I don't know why, maybe it was after surgery or maybe it was after chemo, but you came over for dinner, and she was probably 2 at the time. And you swooped her up, and at the time I couldn't lift her, so it must have been after her surgery. So I couldn't lift her, and you swooped her up, and you guys are dancing, right? Giggling, dancing, she's laughing, having so much fun. And I was bawling, and I was like, why is this so emotional? And there's a lot packed into that, right? One was, I wasn't the one that could be lifting her up, but also so appreciative that somebody that has that part of my spirit and that part of my experience of having spent years doing silly things together, that I knew that would live on with her, and she was creating that bond. And then also that she was creating that connection to something so meaningful to me, even though it wasn't me, and having a surrogate for something that I wanted to be the mom doing that, but to be able to have somebody else that could kind of do that with her, I think was really powerful. So it was kind of like a grief, anger, joy, all wrapped up into that moment.
You quoted Beaches at that time, where you were fishing over the edge. I mean, like you're saying, there's all these, right, there's like these like living griefs, moments. And transitions and joys all together. It made me think of too, though, when you're saying even just the grief of stopping breastfeeding. If you could for a moment too, you were working, right? You were consulting, and you have this very big career in marketing. And I always joke, I'm just like always following in your footsteps. I'm always like laughing about how accomplished you are, and always asking you to help me with this stuff. But you also stopped working.
Yeah, I worked for probably the first year and a half part-time. Because I was consulting, so I could pick and choose what I did. But yeah, after a while, it just got to be too much. Just mainly because of the accountability to a certain date, and being able to do something on a certain date was really hard.
Was it hard to share this with colleagues, like the workplace? You probably.
No, for me, it's not, because I'm just very much an open book kind of person. I think that's very different for every person and their circumstance.
We're going to have a part 2, but I just wanted to wrap up this particular episode with our Asking for a Friend segment, as you know. We talked about it. Usually you're asking for me. It's like asking It's like asking for our friends. I know they're all listening. People are always saying, check for blood in your stool. So we talked about that, and I just talked about what that actually looks like. When should people seek medical attention? But I just didn't know if you had any sort of kind of other words of advice about just checking for blood in your stool. And maybe it's not checking, but noticing.
Yeah, I think blood in the stool is one thing, but I think it's even more so unusual bowel movement. Okay. And what does that mean, right? Because I do think, blood in your stool, like, if it's enough blood, it's pretty obvious that it's blood. Right. But I think understanding that, somebody told me, and I don't know if this is true, you, medically speaking, can tell me if this is true, that their GI doctor said that if you go to the bathroom and you have to wipe more than a couple times, it probably is an unusual bowel movement.
It's blood, yeah. Or
no, just in general, because it's not coming out clean. It doesn't mean like if that happens to you once, that's like a problem. But if that's persistent, that means that the consistency of your stool, but I guess maybe not.
But we're going to have a GI doctor on. And we're
good. Ask her that.
Because they have little even diagrams, like really fabulous details, illustrations of all the way that your stools can look. So, okay, let's...
And also the frequency, too. Yes. Like the frequency, if you are somebody who typically goes once a day, and then all of a sudden you're going 3 times a day.
The change, though.
The change is really...
Okay.
And also the other thing, too, is constipation. I always thought constipation was like difficulty being able to go, right? And sometimes I can go multiple days without going now from treatment. And what I've learned is that also is constipation. It doesn't mean you're straining on the toilet. It means that you have it.
That's right.
You could be feeling fine, but if you're not going regularly, that is constipation. So I think understanding those things about your
own body,
yes, probably for any disease, but in colorectal cancer, understanding that related to, and not also assuming it's colon cancer, but understanding too, like those are things to talk to your doctor about. And a lot of people are ignored. They go to their doctor and then not ignored, but it's like, it doesn't, again, they're dismissed because it's not. And so if you feel like something's wrong, really, again, have that agency to have those conversations and see if you can get to the bottom of what it is.
Right. I apologize in advance for anyone who ever has felt or feels dismissed, right? But that is where the personal advocacy is really helpful. And again, that is also sometimes where, sometimes the strength in numbers and having a friend with you or a family member makes a difference, right? To like advocate for you, especially when you're feeling vulnerable or you don't feel good. You know, it's asking a lot of people to advocate, especially when you don't feel good. So, bring that friend. Okay, this is, obviously one of my favorites, but asking for a friend. My brother refuses to get a colonoscopy. How can I kick him in the butt, pun intended, to get one done?
So I think the quote that I always say is, you think a colonoscopy is bad, try having colon cancer. So I think if you know somebody who's been through this disease, it is clear that having a colonoscopy is not bad, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that there's some, and actually, to me, a colonoscopy, like it's like a colon cleanse that people spend millions of dollars to have regularly, and also a wonderful nap. But the prep is the part that I think people really challenge. But also, if you're regular and you don't really have issues, it's not that bad, and afterwards people say it wasn't as bad, it wasn't pleasant, but it wasn't as bad as I thought. But I think that the bigger issue is people that are scared to find out.
That's right.
Right. So it's like, I don't want to do a colonoscopy not because of the prep and all that stuff I can, whatever, get past. But I don't want to know if something's wrong. Mm-hmm. And I think the big challenge there, and it's the same with scans, when you have disease and all that stuff, it's not, whether you know it or not doesn't make it true. It is true. The question is, do you know it and can do something about it? And if you can catch it early, it is much better outcomes than if it progresses and gets to the point where you have symptoms.
And outcomes is fancy for quality of life, living longer.
Yeah. Well, the cure rate for stage 3 cancer is very high.
Right.
The cure rate for stage 4 cancer, not that high. So...
and I say to all my patients who haven't gotten it, friends who haven't gotten it, I mention you. I say, look, my best friend has, stage 4 colon cancer. So you can just go get a colonoscopy, right?
Yes. And there's progress, and I'm excited for you to meet with a GI doctor because there's progress on a lot more screening tools that will make it, kind of make it more accessible. So if somebody's really resistant to having a colonoscopy, there are, stool tests and things that may not be as accurate, but it's a lot more accurate than nothing, than, not doing any tests. The best test is the test you do.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
So.
Yes, so go get your colonoscopy.
Yes, and I'll come to his door.
Yeah, if your brother, if it was my brother, yes, you actually know where he lives. Both of them. Okay, we have our new little segment called From the Rooftops.
Oh.
So if there's one message that you could shout from the rooftops, or whatever, say in a very quiet, soothing tone, what would it be? What do you want everyone to know so far about what we've talked about? But
I think that you as a person are still you as a person, and you're bringing that to cancer. So cancer or any, life-changing terminal diagnosis, even though it might affect your life entirely, you have it. It does not have you. And you're not doing it alone. Because even if you have something super rare, there's people that have been through similar, and ask questions. So, treat your primary care doctor like the best friend that the primary care doctor, Dr. Hahn, said in the last episode or in an earlier episode, because having that understanding of each other, you as their patient, them as your doctor, will help prevent a lot of these things from happening.
And help along the way.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to wrap up this episode for now. There's so much more to cover. To our listeners, join us for episode 2, Moving Beyond Survival and Living with Metastatic Cancer. And also for our listeners, do see our show notes. There's going to be links to a lot of the information that Julie mentioned, UCLA Health information about colorectal cancer. We'll even have a brief glossary of terms.
How good.
And, relevant support and resources for patients and caregivers. So, Jules, thanks for joining this episode.
Thank
you
so
back
much.
in a second.